Here's my thought for you today. One of the issues, and maybe this is just my humble opinion, but I think one of the issues in our day is that so many people in our country and our culture have strongly held opinions that are based upon very little evidence. And then there are things that they reject also based upon very little evidence. Whatever your political persuasion may be, or whatever you may think about the events that are unfolding in our country and our world today, the question is your opinion based on sincere, considered thought? Or have you taken just a small thing that you have heard, and then and because that works for you, you've run with it? Throughout history, many people have rejected the reality of Christ because they just could not come to terms with the reality of the resurrection. And across the years, there have been many theories that have been put out there to either outright reject or explain away or dilute the power of the resurrection. The question, as we look towards Easter, one of the questions that it really is important for us to ask is really, what do we believe about the resurrection? Is it just something that, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not? Is it something that we wholeheartedly believe is, in fact, a historical reality? And if we do believe that, have we taken the time to really think through, what does it mean for me as a follower of Christ if I really, truly believe that the resurrection as a singular event in history, the total resurrection of a human being not to die again, what that means to me? I want to share with you some quotes of historians and people who have really delved into this over time, and really more in our recent history, regarding the resurrection of Christ. You can get online, you can look at a lot of different books that speak to the historical evidence of the resurrection of Christ. And if this is something you haven't done before, I would encourage you to do some personal research into this. But I'm just going to share with you some conclusions that literally world-renowned historians over time have come to regarding the crucifixion, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. Josh McDowell said this: "After more than 700 hours of studying this subject, I've come to the conclusion that the resurrection of Jesus is either one of the most wicked, vicious, heartless hoaxes ever foisted on the minds of human beings, or it is the most remarkable fact of history." This is another historian. "I claim to be a historian, and my approach to the classics is historical. And I tell you that the evidence for the life, the death, and the resurrection of Christ is better authenticated than most of the facts of ancient history." Another quote: "There exists no document from the ancient world witnessed by so excellent a set of textual and historical testimonies. Skepticism regarding the historical credentials of Christianity is based upon an irrational bias." And F.F. Bruce, one of the great Christian theologians of our generation and the past generation, said this: "If the New Testament were a collection of secular writings, their authenticity would be regarded as beyond all doubt." A classical Roman historian: "For the New Testament of Acts, the confirmation of historicity is overwhelming. Any attempt to reject its basic historicity, even in matters of detail, must appear absurd. Roman historians have long taken it for granted." And then listen to this statement. This came out of an essay that Josh McDowell wrote regarding the historical evidence of the resurrection of Christ. "Professor Thomas Arnold, for 14 years the headmaster of rugby, author of the famous History of Rome, and appointed to the chair of modern history at Oxford, was well acquainted with the value of evidence in determining historical facts. This great scholar said, 'I have been used for many years to the study of histories of other times and to examine and weigh the evidence of those who have written about them. And I know of no one fact in the history of mankind which is proved by better and by fuller evidence of every sort to the understanding of a fair inquirer than the great sign which God has given us, that Christ died and rose again from the dead.'" Brooke Foss Westcott, an English scholar, said, raking all the evidence together, it is not too much to say that there is no historical incident better or more variously supported than the resurrection of Christ. Nothing but the antecedent assumption that it must be false could have suggested the idea of deficiency in the proof of the resurrection of Christ. Now, that's some old language there, but they're basically saying if a person is honest and does not come to the question already predetermining that the resurrection is false, it is almost impossible to find any other historical fact of greater historical evidence than the reality of the resurrection of Christ. But of all of these arguments, I think one of the most compelling, and many, many people have written on this, is the proof of the disciples' lives. McDowell says it this way, but the most telling testimony of all must be the lives of those early Christians. We must ask ourselves, what caused them to go everywhere telling the message of the risen Christ? Now, had there been any visible benefits accrued to them from their efforts, such as prestige, wealth, increased social status, or material benefits, we might logically attempt to account for their actions, for their wholehearted and total allegiance to this risen Christ. However, as a reward for their efforts, these early Christians were beaten, they were stoned to death, they were thrown to the lions, they were tortured, and they themselves were crucified. Every conceivable method was used to stop them from talking. And yet, they laid down their lives as the ultimate proof of the complete confidence in the truth of their message, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. My friends, the question to us is, what do we believe about the resurrection? And if it is true, not just a story meant to teach us a lesson that we then go and try to apply to our life, but if the real Jesus came out of the real tomb and set underway God's real creative work of new creation in the lives of men and in eternity, what does that mean to us? Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Tune in tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel.